There was once a very rich and powerful king who had a very big and very unusual ruby that was beyond price. It was such a unique gem that everybody thought that that ruby was the secret of the king's wealth and power. And the king, well, thought it too. And so he was very jealous of the ruby, and he didn't show it to anyone, and he kept it covered with the golden cloth. And the first thing that he did every morning when he woke up was to unveil the ruby and gaze at it with great pride. Until one morning, when he unveiled the ruby, the king saw that the ruby had upon it a scratch. How was it possible? What could have happened? Because the king was sure that that scratch was not there the night before, and no one had access to the ruby. No one except him. So the king started to wonder. May it be that I've damaged the ruby myself? May it be that's because I've gazed at it for too long, that I've gazed at it too much? What am I saying? Oh my goodness. That ruby is getting me crazy. But in that very moment, the king felt a strange shiver running down his spine, and he couldn't help but think that that scratch could be a sign of misfortune, could be a sign that he was about to lose his wealth and power, and so that scratch had to be repaired. And so the king called all his palace jewelers to come and examine the ruby. But to the utter consternation, they all agreed that, well, it was a very strange scratch, and there was nothing that could be done without causing further damage. The king was devastated, and so he offered a lavish reward to any jeweler who was able to repair his ruby. And many jewelers came, but after having examined the ruby, again they all agreed that it was really a very strange scratch, and there was nothing that could be done to repair it. The king was really desperate, and so he no longer passed his days gazing at the ruby, but he no longer looked at it at all, and he kept it covered with the golden cloth, fearing that that scratch may become bigger and his wealth and power smaller. Until one day, one of his servants told the king that he had heard of a very old retired jeweler who lived in a remote village, who was said to be very experienced in working with damaged gems. Really? And so the king immediately sent for this old jeweler. And this old jeweler arrived a few days later, but when he arrived and when the king saw him, well, he didn't really look like the king had expected. Because, yes, he was an old, bent man, but he was shabbily dressed. So the king thought, well, all right, he's old. I knew it, but I'd imagined that if he was so skillful, he should have become a very rich man. So perhaps, maybe he's not so skillful after all. But then he saw a strange light in the old jeweler's eyes, and he felt again that strange shiver ran down his spine. And so he took the ruby and he showed it to the old jeweler. Sir, Would you please examine my ruby and tell me whether you can repair it?" So the old jeweler took the ruby and then did something that the king did not expect at all, because he placed his ear against the scratch and listened in silence. But what are you doing?" asked the king. "Shh, I'm listening to the ruby's voice and what the ruby would like to tell us, what the scratch really means." "What? But the ruby hasn't got a voice." "This man must be completely crazy. I mean, crazy too if I'm going to listen to him." But the king's thoughts were interrupted by the old jeweler's voice was saying, "Your Majesty, I cannot repair your ruby, but I've listened to the ruby's heart and to its desire. So I cannot repair the ruby, but if you wish and if you trust me, I can make the ruby even more beautiful." Well, as you can imagine, the king was very, very, very skeptical. But then again, he saw that strange light in the jeweler's eyes. And again, he felt that strange shiver. And so he just said, "All right." And so the old jeweler took the ruby, and he was given a room where he could work. But the king could not see what the old jeweler was doing, because he locked the room. And the only thing that the king could hear if he placed his ear against the door was the old jeweler working, cutting and polishing, cutting and polishing for days and days, until one day the old jeweler opened the door. He was holding something in his hand, but it was covered with a golden cloth. What was it? What have we done? What had he done with the ruby? And when he handed it to the king looked at it and he hesitated for a moment. But then he looked up and, well, he looked at the old jeweler's eyes. The old jeweler was not saying a word, but his eyes spoke for him, and they were just saying, "Don't worry, go ahead." And so the king took a deep breath and unveiled and lifted the cloth. And so the king saw that out of the damaged ruby, the old jeweler had carved the most delicate rose with its stem formed by the scratch. And so the king's heart filled with beauty, and it filled with joy and with happiness. And now, yes, now he could too hear the ruby's voice and its hidden message. If you see any scratch in the world around you, just use your skills and power to repair it and to turn it into something more beautiful. And that's what the king then did, no longer fearing of losing his wealth and power. And so, my friends, now I leave you to ponder. Is there in your life, in the world around you, any scratch that you can repair and turn into something more beautiful?